Just when I thought I was finally safe, I saw a pair of yellow eyes staring at me through the window. They were unmoving, as if waiting for something. Chapter 46, a sermon in syllables. He was older than I expected. Patchy white hair adorned the old man's age, spotted scalp. A matching beard lined his jaw. Deep-set lines and wrinkles etched the story of his life across his cheeks. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm, and forehead. He was a large man, but he was small. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. What once must have been a tall and lean figure was now a hunched back and sagging skin. Beatus Amiel. I came as quickly as I could. He spoke in rushed words. The man's voice what it expected. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. It was light-hearted and showed no sign of his age. If you'd heard his voice without seeing him first, you'd have thought he was much older than myself. Samuel moved to the side of the room, clearing a path for the man. He kept his arms folded and jerked his head towards me. She needs your help. The man, who I assumed to be Marshall, glanced my way. His eyes light up for a second, their bright golden color glinting in the unnatural light. Certainly, Beta. Marshall walked forward, and once again his age was shown nowhere but his face. His walk was heavy, but it purposeful and elegant. He scanned me once over the closer he came, his nostrils flaring as he took a deep breath. I tried not to shy away from him, but the closer he drew, the harder it was. Appearances were misleading, and I was ready to let myself be deceived. My nerves were on edge, and though my body was tired and failing, it tensed for the worst. If Marshall noticed my wariness, he didn't say anything. He simply smiled lightly and came to stand next to his desk, opening the oversized first aid kits Amiel had placed there earlier. What seems to be the problem? Just above her hip. Samuel answered for me. Achidi mimicked Marshall in moving closer to me, and was now standing barely a foot away from the desk. His arms were still folded tightly against his chest, and his mouth was a permanent, thin line. Marshall nodded. Without further explanation, the old man lifted up my shirt to reveal the wound. I kept my gaze averted, but the silence that followed the revelation of my bloodied skin gave me everything I needed to know. Samuel abruptly cursed and took another step forward. His gaze snapped up to mine, and for the first time since we'd left the woods, I saw a glimpse of emotion leak back into his eyes. He opened his mouth to say something, but as soon as he did, Marshall sighed. With that noise, Samuel slipped back into stone. It's not as bad as it looks. Marshall began prodding the area around my stitches. He quickly grabbed a cloth and started wiping away excess blood, carefully avoiding my stitches. Can you tell me what happened? This will help me know how to treat it. As he spoke, he turned and brought something else to my skin, squeezing a cool liquid that rolled down my side and fell in a pool around my leg. Samuel answered before I could open my mouth. She fell. I fell on top of her. To my surprise, a small chuckle escaped Marshall's lips. Kids these days, he mused. It wasn't anything like that. I protested immediately, shifting away from the two of them. Marshall's gaze flicked up to mine, then to Samuel, who was still as emotional as Boulder. Unspoken accusations danced in his eyes, and he did little to hide his amusement. I stated it again, my voice rising. Tell him, Samuel, tell him what happened. Marshall laughed again, and as he did, something sharp stabbed my side. It was pulled painfully from my skin, and then, before I could protest, it happened again. I gasped in pain, my eyes darting to Marshall's hands just in time to see him pulling my stitches apart. Marshall smiled. Just trying to distract you, hon. Before I could register his words, he turned to Samuel. The stitches are torn, and a few were digging into her flesh, but I'm not going to sew them back up. I don't want to risk sealing in any infection. He turned for a moment, and when he faced me again, he was holding a large roll of gauze and bandages. Keep it covered and clean. Change these every few hours until the bleeding stops. The skin has been healing nicely and shortened need further treatment. Samuel stepped forward. He was standing next to us now, a look of confusion lining his features. That's all. The blood. He trailed off. Superficial. Like I said, it wasn't as bad as it looked. Now that the loose stitches are gone, she should be fine. Just give her time to heal and she'll be functioning in no time. Marshall then turned to me, looking me dead in the eyes. Don't let Amy boy fuss you out of bed now. You need to stay still and relax no matter what he tells you, especially with that sprained ankle. Samuel let out what was an unattractive mix between a snort and a scoff. This seemed to be the reaction Marshall was hoping for because his eyes light up a little bit more at the sound. If you have troubles with him, you just let me know. Uncertainly, Marshall dropped his gaze and turned to face Samuel. As soon as the doctor caught his eye, Samuel's expression deadened. Once more, he folded his arms again, and gruffly told him, "Thanks. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nolban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." That's all we needed. Marshall shook his head. If you think I'm going to walk out of here with you looking like this, then you're more foolish than I thought. Go up on the desk with you. He gestured to the spot beside me. My eyes widened and darted between Samuel and Marshall. The two were in a sudden face-off, but Samuel was clearly winning. It half expected Samuel to lash out at the old man for his disrespectful tone, but he hadn't uttered a word of rebuttal. The two men stood glaring at each other. Every unspoken word poured into their expressions. Whoever this Marshall was, he was important enough to Samuel not to warrant immediate outrage at insolence. Marshall suddenly shifted and sneered, breaking the temporary silence. Do I need to fetch Goldie? Samuel scowled, eakened, but something flashed in his eyes, though he didn't move a muscle to comply or surrender. Marshall let out an abrupt laugh and all traces of annoyance were erased from his expression. I didn't think so. Now up onto the desk before I change my mind. Marshall waved his arms about, and to my surprise, Samuel did as he was told. He picked up the box of first aid supplies and thrust it into Marshall's arms, sitting down in its place. The old man pulled up one of his chairs and placed the box on it, rummaging through the supplies. Turn around, he demanded, brandishing gauze and tweezers. Samuel grumbled under his breath, and though I cowed and hear him, I knew it was a slew of curses aimed at Marshall. He did as he was told. Despite the flash of annoyance glare in his eyes, Marshall chose to ignore this and began to work on Samuel's back. It was a lengthy process, for several minutes. The room was deathly quiet. The only sounds filling the four walls were the clink of metal as Marshall pulled bullets from Samuel's skin and dropped them into a glass container. I watched his methodical movements, slightly entranced. His fingers were graceful as they simultaneously wiped away blood and handled tweezers. Marshall never hesitated, nor did he think about his movements. It was second nature to him. His hands were just an extension of his brain. Enjoying the show, Marshall suddenly cut into my thoughts. Pausing his movements, he looked at me with slightly tilted lips, and for some reason, I bowed my head in embarrassment. I've just never seen someone do this before. He resumed his work on Samuel's back, the words he spoke doing nothing to break his concentration. It certainly hope not. It's not every day you have to pull bullets from the flesh. Remembering how it was just days ago I was doing the same thing to Samuel. We were trapped in a hole several feet underground. You'd think that was the case. Marshall laughed lightly. Already got her in gunfights. Do ya, Sammy boy? Not by choice. Samuel growled. I tried not to flinch at the sound and again searched my brain for the source of Samuel's anger. There were countless ideas that flashed in my mind, but I pushed each and every one away. It was easier to live in ignorance, if only for a few more minutes. Deep down, I knew why he was angry, and that was the very reason I was denying my thoughts. Marshall noticed my discomfort. He paused for a moment before a wicked smile spread across his face. His tweezers were halfway into Samuel's skin, and without warning, he twisted his hand and sent them deeper into the flesh. Samuel cursed loudly, flinching forward and whirling around to glower at Marshall. He stood in the same spot, hands lingering where Samuel's back had been just moments before. What the hell? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Samuel bit out. He raised his eyebrows in response. I was just trying to clean the wound. Beta, the bullets are extremely deep. Samuel rolled his eyes and huffed. He sent the old man a hard look, and when he turned around again, Marshall winked at me. I stared at him with my jaw hanging open and eyes to match my surprise. Marshall ignored the both of us. You know, I think I will bring Goldie up here. She deserves to meet your mate. Samuel. No, he growled again. Marshall repeated his movement from before. Samuel cursed loudly, and another smile spread across Marshall's face. She sure would hate to hear you take that kind of tone, in the presence of your mate. Nonetheless, I waited for a cold remark from Samuel, but none came. He simply kept his back turned to the two of us, letting Marshall continue his work. At this, the old man smiled. He pulled another broken bullet from Samuel's wound, much gentler this time. It fell into the glass tray, and before Marshall attacked another, he turned to look at me, eyes glowing. I don't think we've officially met. Marshall made odd. His smirk turned into a genuine smile, as he met my eyes for a moment. Samantha. I trailed off. Samantha, he repeated. A lovely name. A bit ironic, don't you think? I guess. The word came out as more of a question than a statement. Marshall laughed and began pulling another piece of Samuel's skin apart. Usually I'd implore Sammy boy to introduce us, as proper, but seems HES a bit tied up at the moment. This will have to do. I smiled again. Uncertainly, Samuel cut in. Now it's not really the time for niceness and pleasantries. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Marshall's face fell slightly. Quite the contrary. Now it's more a time than ever. He hesitated, and as he did, his hands paused. Is it true? A moment of silence passed before Samuel let out a long and heavy breath. Yes. The old man resumed his work on Samuel's back. He was almost done. Now and only had to dress the wounds. That's what I feared. The smile had fallen from Marshall's face, and in its place was a sullen countenance. I was suddenly looking at a completely different man than moments before and wished he would smile. It lit up the room with a false sense of happiness and allowed all of us to bask in it for a few precious moments. You know what this means. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. He continued. Samuel's harsh tone returned. It doesn't mean anything. Oh, but you know it does. It's not possible. Marshall tore off a large piece of medical tape, ripping it to smaller pieces as he placed patches of gauze along Samuel's back. Of course it's possible. Any other thinking is flawed, and you know that. What are you going to do? Samuel was silent. Have you considered what's going to happen? Marshall cut Samuel off. Then even you know you can't change it. He finished with the last bandage and tapped Samuel's shoulder. Samuel sagged ever so slightly and kept his back to the two of us. They'll find out. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Oh, in counting on it. Silence fell, and the two of them remained in the same position. Marshall was resting his hand on Samuel's bare shoulder, and Samuel hadn't bothered to turn around. Though my mind was running wild with their conversation, I had the sudden urge to leave them alone. Despite my curiosity, The two of them were dealing with something I felt was far beyond my level. The intimacy between the two men was apparent, and it held no place for me. As if sensing my unease, Marshall turned to face me. "Sadly, what do you think, Samantha? Tonight has changed quite a lot for our Samuel, has it not? For the both of you." Nonetheless, my brow furrowed. "I don't really understand." Marshall's sad smile abruptly fell. In its place was an expression that looked much deadlier on the old man than anyone who previously humored the emotion. It was anger. Clear, raw and directed at Samuel. "You haven't told her?" Marshall seethed through his teeth. Samuel stiffened. "It never came up. Never came up." Marshall's voice, instead of rising, lowered to just above a whisper. "You'd better find a nice conversation starter then. Not much of a choice now." "I'm sorry, but what exactly is going on?" I cut in, my eyes piercing Samuel's back, begging him to turn around and explain. "Nothing." Marshall's not thinking straight. The old man let out a sudden, "Hush, laugh. I think I will go get Goldie. Shall get a riot out of this one." Samuel abruptly whirled around, swinging his legs along the side of the desk. Marshall had to jump back in order to not get hit, but his glare never faltered. When Samuel came to face us, I saw that a similar scowl was lacing his eyes. As well. "Not tonight. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nelben, heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm." Samuel bit out. Then, his eyes scanned the man once over. He softened his frown just slightly and let out a huff of air. His mouth hung open with more words, but before they could be uttered, the expressionless mask found its way back into Samuel's countenance. Marshall's glare faltered. His folded arms fell to his side, and he slowly shook his head. "It's your decision, Beta." Samuel nodded but wavered slightly. He opened his mouth to speak again, but a quick look in my direction cut the words from his tongue. He settled to place a stiff hand on Marshall's shoulder. "Thank you for your help. You should get back to the others." Marshall agreed, then smiled. It was like his previous smile. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nelben, heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm." It was an expression to mask what he was truly feeling. The same mask. I realized that Samuel was fighting desperately to keep in place. Then concluded, "You should both be fine. Just stop gallivanting through the forest and getting shot at." His gaze drifted to me. "If your pain is too much, tell Samuel. He knows where everything is. It should get better. Just stay close to him." Before I could respond, the old man straightened and turned away from his desk. "I better be off. If you have any questions, you know where to find me." "How is everyone else looking?" Samuel suddenly asked, his voice quavering. Marshall shook his head, letting his eyes fall to his bloody hands. "I'll tell you in the morning." He left the room quickly and quietly. His previously pounding feet were nowhere to be found, but instead had been replaced with the dragging step of an old man. As soon as Marshall was gone, Samuel stood. He began cleaning what was left over from Marshall's work, keeping his back turned to me the entire time. A flash of hurt hit my chest, but I desperately pushed it away. Like everything else, I blinked several times before asking, "What was that about?" "Nothing." I pursed my lips, taking a deep breath. "I'm not an idiot. I know something's going on that you're not telling me. Is that something new for us?" Samuel glanced at me from the side of his eye. He began throwing away pieces of bloodied gauze and tucking stray supplies back into the first aid box. Abrupt anger filled my heart. But before I could retort, Samuel had finished his task and disappeared through the door to my left. He was gone for several minutes, and in that time, my anger died. I was too drained to hold on to it and fight back everything else. Samuel returned, now wearing a dark-colored shirt. He ignored my presence and began picking up the countless piles of paper that had been carelessly thrown off the desk. I gave him several more minutes of silence before finally sighing. "Samuel, I resisted the urge to tap my fingers against my folded arms. What? Can you just tell me something? Letting his shoulders sag, he moved to sit in the chair that Marshall had pulled up to the desk. And when he sat down, he leaned his arms on his legs and hung his head. There's a lot going on, Samantha. My arms unfolded and fell into my lap. I understand that much. What do you want from me? What was Marshall talking about? Samuel rubbed the back of his neck, groaning under his breath. Nothing. His tone was filled with as much anger as previously, but it was now laced with exhaustion. I closed my eyes, counting my breaths. It took me upwards of 20 before I finally responded. I understand if you don't want to talk about things, but from what Marshall said, whatever is going on involves me. Is that true? He hesitated. To an extent. Then I'd like to know. Samuel was quiet for a long minute. When he finally spoke, his voice was drained of emotion. I can't deal with that tonight, Samantha. Not on top of everything else. I've got to find Bray and figure out what happened, and what HES told the pack. I let out a long breath, twisting my fingers together in my lap. I hadn't really expected Samuel to tell me anything, so his reaction didn't come as a surprise. I was only growing tired of not knowing what was going on, and thought maybe this piece of information could distract me from the other thoughts threatening to spill from my eyes. Can't you tell me what's happening with Bray, or the pack? Anything. He raised his head to stare at my feet, hanging limply off the side of the desk. I don't know. That's the problem. Will's shift was going normal. You and Raven showed up. Then we were attacked. In all honesty, it was probably the humans. There's not much else it could be. Blindly, I nodded, taking in any information Samuel would give me. Something scratched at the back of my mind, though. And his words, no matter how hard I tried, didn't settle right with me. What are you going to do? Samuel straightened, sitting upright in the chair. I have to talk to Bray and sort everything out. Preferably tomorrow. But knowing him, it won't wait. He finally turned to look at me. I need to know the whole story if I'm going to confront him. Everything that happened with you and Raven. HES going to use it. My voice came out hesitantly. Bray thinks I had something to do with Riley's death. Samuel nodded. That's what it sounds like. What do you think? I asked before I could stop myself. Then, already knowing the answer, I continued. That's why you've been so closed off. I was beginning to tread dangerous waters, but no matter how I tried, I couldn't pull myself to shore. These thoughts were bursting inside of me, despite my harsh efforts to push them away. It barely had time to process the night's events, but as each moment came to my memory, a dark cloud covered my heart. With each scenario I sorted through, I was slowly realizing my never-ending faults. What if questions swarmed my brain? And before I knew it, I was entirely convinced that it single-handedly caused the night to end the way it did in death. Suddenly, I couldn't look at Samuel. I'm not closed off. I took a deep breath. You've barely said two words to me until now. Lowering my folded arms and twisting my fingers. You think I had something to do with it? My words were phrased carefully. If Samuel was only thinking of what Bray implied, the conversation would continue on and my thoughts would be left to myself. But if Samuel believed I was the one to deliberately kill Riley, I'd understand my vague accusation and would undoubtedly affirm my suspicions. And then, the castle of cards would slowly begin to build would start to fall. But this time, it wouldn't be Samuel's fault. It'd be mine. Samuel was quiet for a long time. Eventually, he told me. That's what I thought at first. He paused then, letting the sentence sink into my soul. When he continued, I barely registered the words. But then I realized how stupid a thought that was. My brow furrowed and I bit my lip. What do you mean? I know you didn't have anything to do with it. How can you be so sure? Samuel finally met my gaze. His dark blue eyes swam in time with the ocean's currents, each emotion sweeping up and under the others. You wouldn't put your brother at risk like that. I'd like to think you wouldn't put yourself at risk. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. They did shoot at all of us. My fingers finally stopped twisting with each other and fell limply to my lap. I didn't want anyone to die. I know. He stared at me, trapping my eyes with his own. Though he spoke to simple words, a sermon was laced within the syllables. Those 2 words were so simple, and spoken so softly, that I almost missed it. So much rested behind the phrase. I could feel it when he spoke. It was as if the small sentence was all he needed to say to convey the fact he wasn't angry, hurt, or untrusting of me. He considered the very thing I was hinting at. And he moved on. There was no blame, no hatred, but that couldn't be true. Even though I was staring at his eyes, and felt the truth pouring out of them, I refused to believe it. He should have blamed me. I was the human. I had a gun. His alpha had died. It barely gotten hurt. However, where there should have been betrayal and fear in Samuel's eyes, there was only understanding. It didn't make sense, no matter how many times I wrapped my head around it. Samuel cowled and let something like go. He shouldn't be able to put aside what appeared to be true and trust someone who wasn't even of his own species. But he had, and I suddenly felt terrible. He'd done all of that, and had barely bothered to entertain the thought that it was my actions that got Riley killed. Where did you get the gun? Samantha. Samuel's question finally reached my ears and startled me out of my thoughts. I'd been asking this same question for the past few minutes, and had done nothing more than continue to stare into his eyes. What? He repeated the question for what I was sure was the 10th time, his annoyance starting to show. Where did you get the gun? I hesitated, gathering my thoughts and trying not to grimace. If Samuel trusted me before, this was sure to shatter it. Then again, maybe it was better this way. Maybe then I wouldn't have to face him and force myself to push back the guilt that was now threatening to eat my insides. Samuel questioned lowly. I nodded, biting my lip. He was one of the ones who first helped me out of town. Part of the humans. Samuel stilled and tilted his head. I could tell where his thoughts were going, but I did nothing to clarify. Facing this was easier than facing the truth. How did you get it? His voice was barely above a mumble. I want the full story. My head dipped to my chest. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Samuel would want clarification. It would require a tender mercy for him to believe what it him to believe. But, being the perfect soul he was, I'd ever believed a betrayal from implications. Raven and I were trying to get to the forest. We stayed in the back alleys, and when we heard someone coming toward us, we hid behind a dumpster. It turned out to be Cade and his brother. I took their gun and Raven knocked them out. He met my gaze, and once again, his eyes were a storm. You knocked them out. I nodded. One of them was already unconscious. I didn't want them to attack us or come after us. Raven did it. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. It was her idea to put them in the dumpster. Samuel raised an eyebrow. The dumpster. We thought it might look suspicious for them to be out on the street. We didn't want to get caught. Samuel sighed heavily. They'll send someone to find them. If they're injured, they can't have gotten far. They can tell us where the rest of them went. That's it. I questioned, incredulously. You're just going to believe me? What do you mean? Is there more? No, I bit my lip. Why do you even trust me? After what happened? I trailed off, attempting to stop the flood of words threatening to spill. But the dam broke, and they came. If it wasn't for me in the first place. I just do. Samuel cut me off. His lips thinned and his gaze fell to the ground. It's not your fault. I'm sorry if you thought I was upset with you. I'm stressed. Samantha. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. It's my fault. I said it was. That doesn't make sense. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I quickly shook my head. You should be thinking what Peyton thinks. You should not. I desperately wanted to raise my gaze to meet Samuel's, but I kept it firmly planted on the ground. But it's true, and we both know it is. You shouldn't be trusting me. I've given you no reason to. That's not true. You helped me before. You're helping me now. Believe it or not. I've also run before, and broke out of the apartment, and kept things from you, and hated you, and blamed you, and cursed dryly too. Stop. Samuel cut me off. He was quiet for a long moment, letting out several large breaths. I know what you're thinking. Samantha, just stop. I told you it wasn't your fault. I know it wasn't. And I don't believe you. Samuel abruptly stood and began pacing the room. I listened to the echo of his shoes on the hardwood floor, and each step hitting the wood was another shot to my side. Samuel was broken, and here I was, opening a forbidden box of pain the very night it was inflicted. Let's just drop it. I tried to salvage the situation. We both need rest. No, Samuel spoke without missing a beat in his paces. No, we might as well finish this. It was going to come up sooner or later. I'd rather talk of this than anything else. Right now. My mouth hung half open in confusion. What else could weigh so heavily on Samuel's mind? That he'd rather discuss the death of his best friend, and more importantly, the woman who caused it. You made a mistake, Samantha, he continued, ignoring my silence. I'll let you have that much. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I nodded, looking up momentarily to watch Samuel's movements. His hands were placed on his hips, and he travelled the length of the office in barely 3 strides. As he spoke, his mask began to slowly chip away. But you have to understand, I've made mistakes. I'm not innocent. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I forced you into a life you never wanted. I culled and protect you. I've snapped at you, taken you for granted, caused your family to disappear and your brother to turn into something you hate. I'm not oblivious to it all. I've just been selfish. He stopped pacing then, turning to catch my before I had the chance to lower my gaze. His face held a determination I hadn't seen before, and it trapped me in a single glance. Samuel's eyes held such intensity, such emotion, that I cowed and believed he tried to ever hide it. Mistakes aren't who you are. They're just a part of what we've done. We can't change it, and there's no sense in hating ourselves for it. He sighed and slowly began walking back towards me. Trust me when I say that there are many things I wish I could change. Before I met you, I wasted years trying to find a way to do just that. I'm still trying. But no matter what we do, we can't change the past. And we can hate ourselves for it. Or we can learn and not make the same mistake twice. Samuel was standing in front of me now. Our eyes were locked in an embrace that not even reality could break. 1,000 different stories danced between us, each one being told through our breaths. That's why I can't let you go, he eventually finished. And that's why I trust you. I couldn't find words adequate enough to respond to what Samuel had spoken. He seemed to understand this though and smiled warmly. His hand found my own, and without hesitation, my fingers laced themselves into his. Eventually, with my heart pounding in my ears, I breathed my response. Just like that. Just like that. I don't understand how you do it. What? Trust. Any of it. I don't deserve it. None of us really deserve anything. Samantha. But we give it to each other. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel, Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. It's not always a good thing, and you have more reasons than anyone not to trust. You've only ever been around the worst. My eyebrows hung heavy over my eyelids. I thought of James, knowing that was exactly who Samuel was hinting at. But then, I also thought of Riley. To my agent extraordinaire, Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Certainly, my life had been tainted before I even had the chance to form an opinion. But then, I thought of Raven. I even thought of the brief interaction I had with Marshall. Lastly, I thought of Samuel. That's not exactly true. I told him, "You're not all the worst." I finally raised my eyes to meet Samuel's. Knowing he'd been watching me this entire time, my eyes met his just in time to see a sad smile creep across his face. In a moment it was gone, replaced by a knowing smirk. "You mean to tell me you don't hate me?" I hid my smile. "All in saying is you're not the worst." He shook his head, any trace of humor suddenly gone. "I wouldn't say that just yet." "Why not? You practically just poured your heart out and I'm supposed to hate you for it." "That was only a piece." I searched Samuel's eyes for a further explanation. "Where's the rest?" He dipped his head, and I knew, in that instant, the conversation was over. Before he even cut me off, before he redirected my attention like he'd done with him so many times before. "I need to go find Bray," Samuel mumbled. I resisted the urge to sigh. "To my agent extraordinaire, Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." Chapter 47 for now. With the end of our conversation, I believed Samuel would immediately leave the room. However, he tiredly backed away and sat down in the armchair next to Marshall's desk. Then, he looked at me, warily. "Bray's going to be throwing accusations out about you being human and with the gun. I'm going to try and isolate him, but I don't know if it's going to work. I'll bring you to the room next to Will and hopefully, everything will be sorted out in the morning." I nodded, then paused. A memory from the night resurfaced and refused to go unnoticed. "Samuel, there's something else about the gun." I slowly started, thinking back to Cade and his brother. Samuel looked at me, raising one of his eyebrows. "Yes. Cade told me something, and it doesn't make sense. I've tried thinking about it, but no matter what, something is off." I tilted my head to the side, staring at the floor between us as if it held the answers. I hesitated, and when I did, Samuel let out a sharp breath. "What is it?" "Well, Cade told me that the wolves already caught up with his group and him and his brother were just trying to escape. The way he talked made it seem like the others were already caught." Samuel shrugged. The gesture was supposed to be nonchalant, but tension laced his shoulders. He could have been lying. "What does this have to do with the gun?" He said that the gun he had was the last one left. "The wolves took them all when they captured and killed everyone when we were taken." Samuel was quiet for a long time. He adopted an unreadable expression and held his fingers together against his nose. When he finally did speak, he kept his gaze trained on the floor. "How do you know he wasn't lying?" I bit my lip. "I don't." "Then, who shot at us if the humans didn't have guns?" My shoulders sagged. "I don't know. Nothing makes sense." Samuel shifted, opening and closing his mouth several times before eventually getting words out. "Yeah, Samantha, what you're saying could be true. But the humans have come after us before. They've lied before. It was just a few hours ago they killed half a dozen of us. It doesn't make sense." To my agent extraordinaire, Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I quickly countered. Everyone has a different story. How could the humans have gotten to us if Bray was hunting them? How could they have shot at us if they didn't have any guns? How did they get away so fast? Why didn't you hear them before? Samuel put up a hand, ending my slew of questions. "I don't have the answers." Samantha, "Well, what do you think they are?" He rested his elbows on his knees and pressed the tips of his fingers to the bridge of his nose. He stayed in that position for a long time, closing his eyes and letting emotion roll away from his features. I hated this new part of Samuel, the one that hid everything he felt. It was so different from the person I initially met. It used to be that I could tell exactly what he was thinking by the look on his face. Now, he was hiding everything. It doesn't make sense. He eventually agreed, opening his eyes. I don't know about the part if we took their guns or not. I haven't seen any. But Riley stopped telling me things after all that happened. All I know is what you've told me, what Bray told me, and now, what some human said. I tried to catch his gaze and failed. None of his stories are adding up. It was true, nothing made sense. If it was the werewolves, it couldn't have been the humans. If what Cade was saying was true, then they had no guns to even fire at us. They'd practically been caught by the time Cade left them. If this was the case, and Cade had no reason to lie to me, they wouldn't have been able to escape a dozen werewolves hunting them down, much less run to the forest to shoot at us. Then again, he'd been betrayed by Cade before. I phrased my next words carefully, sorting through my thoughts out loud. Maybe it was the humans. Samuel paused. James. I shook my head, though somewhat uncertain. What motive would he have? He couldn't have done it alone. Maybe he was alone. I closed my eyes and tugged on the loose ends of my hair. For so long, I believed everything that was going wrong was because of Riley. I was convinced he somehow bit my brother and taken my mother. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing Clichet's enthusiasm. Riley's goal was for Samuel and me to be each other's worlds. It very well could be that he had done all of that. But now I realized there was something else happening. The shooting had been an attack on all of us, including Riley. Someone else was out there, and something larger was going on. You really think it was him? I don't know what to think. Samantha. Samuel let out a heavy sigh, his body falling deeper into the chair. My head fell to my chest and I let out a ragged breath. Why would anyone even want to attack us? He pursed his lips, clear thoughts running across his face. However, he didn't voice them. He only told me, you don't need to worry. Samantha, you'll fix it. Not everything's fixable. Suddenly feeling the weight of oceans crash down upon me, unexpected tears pricked at my eyes, but I forcefully pushed them back. There should be no reason for me to cry right now. No reason. Apart from the fact that my family was missing. It almost died again tonight. And I was no closer to fixing anything than I was when this whole mess started. Samuel shifted his weight, and after a moment's hesitation, he left his chair and sat on the desk with me. His large hand found its way to my knees, just as I pulled them up to my chest. I was tempted to lean into Samuel, but I stayed rooted in place and told myself it was exhaustion drawing me nearer to him, simply the need for a surface to sleep on. He softly continued speaking, comforting me with his words. Everything's going to be fine. Will's going to be fine. Your mother will be fine. Hesitantly reaching forward to turn my face to him. We'll be fine. We will figure out who did this. You don't need to worry. You'll fix it. You've been through enough. Samantha, you don't have to fix everything. Samuel. He shook his head softly. When it was me who caused the mess. Yes. I turned my gaze away and Samuel let go of my cheek. We've both to blame. We've established. He opened his mouth to counter my response, but I spoke over him, quickly changing the subject. Besides, you try and fix everything. He tilted his head. Everything. That's a bit of an exaggeration. Definitely not, he softly snorted. Agree to disagree. A small smirk played on his lips, begging for me to contradict him. I shifted my weight, raising an eyebrow and pointing a finger at his chest. No, I'm definitely right. What about Will? I didn't fix Will. I folded my arms, sending him a pointed look. You fixed his hospital room. Samuel shrugged my comment off, looking around the small office. When I realized he was going to respond, I rest my case. He looked back at me, holding back a wide grin. You're right. I'm a fixer. I know him right. Samuel's shoulders shook with his small laugh. A genuine smile threat and a break through my features. But for some reason, I held it back. Eventually, Samuel patted my knee and sighed. You need rest. So do you. He sneered suddenly, catching my eye. Care to join me? Rolling my eyes dramatically. In your dreams, wolf boy. Tu es agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm. Sammy. That my nickname. That's yours. I've heard two people use it. Now Samuel beamed. Who's to say I can't share? Another smile threat and to spread across my face. Samuel was already grinning broadly, waiting for me to follow. Instead of giving him the satisfaction, I turned my face away and buried my gaze into my other knee. He laughed once before standing and stretching out his hand, letting it linger in the air for me. When I didn't take it, he rolled his eyes. It's a hand. Samantha. It's not going to shoot. I scowled, though I scooted off the desk and took his outstretched palm. That's not funny. You've got to find humor. Somewhere. Come on. He tightened his grip, pulling me close to him so I wouldn't fall. I've got a room for you next to Will. Samuel once again calf carried me through the halls. I'm sure if my wound hadn't been on my side, he would have insisted on carrying me over his shoulder. Like before, I lost track of the number of doors we passed and hallways we crossed. Only when we descended a flight of stairs did I recognize the grandiose living room coming into view. Came the rumbling of voices and shuffling of countless feet running across the hardwood floors. We came to the bottom of the stairs, but before Samuel could lead us to another hallway, he was stopped by a loud voice calling out his name. When it did, the room stopped moving. Everybody paused their movements and turned to face the person who'd called out their beater's name. Up until this point, none of them even knew Samuel was here. Now there was no avoiding it. It didn't take the crowd long to find us, and soon, it felt like hundreds of eyes were staring into my soul. Samuel. The voice of Peyton Brake called out again. The steel tone echoed through the room, sending chills across the once cozy furniture. How nice of you to finally join us. Samuel shifted me so that I was slightly behind him and away from prying eyes. It's better to you. Bray. Samuel's tone matched Bray's in every aspect. Bray called out. That's what we'd all like to know. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. The room was devoid of any noise. The two men's voices echoed across the walls, bouncing back and forth, demanding any and all attention. Samuel eyed the room, stiffening as he held me with one of his arms. A few gasps were heard, and the crowd started to murmur. Countless cries of "Where's the Alpha?" and what happened pierced the group. Before they could get carried away, Samuel raised his hand, and everything silenced once more. I will answer any and all questions you have. For now, let us tend to the wounded and help one another through the night. What about the dead? Bray's voice rose above Samuel's. Shouldn't you be hunting the ones that killed them? Peyton's eyes narrowed. It seems you're already hiding one behind our backs. Again, low voices surrounded us. Bray's words were being taken to heart, and I could suddenly feel an entire pack of werewolves bearing down on me. Their glares, their contempt, their confusion, was all I could sense. It surrounded me in a cocoon, threatening to squeeze the life from my body. Samuel hugged me, reassuringly. Samantha has hurt no one, and she does not intend to. She is my mate. If I thought the crowd murmured before, it was a thunderous wake of outcries now. A ripple fell across each of the werewolves in the room, and each ripple caused a different effect. Some ripples were innocent and held only confusion. Some traveled further with caution. A select few were cut short with rage. Before Samuel could explain further, the crowd grew restless. A few pushed forward to get a better look at Samuel and me, while others began to retreat. Just as the unrest rose to a climax, another loud voice broke through the panic. The feminine voice called. Following it, the crowd parted. A figure emerged from the center of the room, revealing a tall woman stalking towards the front of the crowd. Her skin was darkly tanned, and contrasting bright. Blonde hair fell to her waist. When the woman was separated from the rest of the group, she slowly spun in a circle, catching the gaze of each and every soul. Whoever she met eyes with instantly cowered. That is, until she faced Peyton Bray. When her eyes fixed upon him, the room grew cold with Bray's freezing glare. The woman took no heed of it though, and instead let her voice ring through the air once more. It seems in the wake of devastation, this pack has lost who they are. The woman paused, and the room stilled. Everyone, including me, held their breaths in anticipation of her next words. She smirked, knowing the room was putty in her hands. We have lived around humans for decades now. Why is now any different? Why right now? Do we decide to challenge our leaders and force a divide? The woman didn't wait for a response, but turned back to Bray and returned his glare. It seems that some of us have forgotten our place in the world. Suddenly, the woman spun around again. She walked gracefully towards Samuel and me, her chin rising the closer she came. She came to a stop at Samuel's side, nonchalantly blocking me from view. Beta Samuel and I have this under control. Do your duty to our pack, and we will get through the night. As he said, everything will be explained in the morning. The woman finished speaking, but the crowd made no movement. They continued to look to her for direction, at which she covertly elbowed Samuel. He cleared his throat, gathering the attention back to him. Samuel looked upon the group with an expressionless face, catching each person's eye and sending their gazes to the ground. The ones who have thrown our pack into disarray are not with us tonight. The ones who have killed our own are still out there. While we've been wasting time, they are escaping further and further from our grasp. Yes, we've suffered losses tonight. Yes, we are all scared. But we don't have to be, if the remaining warriors would protect their pack, instead of sending them into panic. Samuel suddenly trained his gaze on Bray. We would all be able to sleep safely tonight. He paused then, letting his words blanket the air. A few people were nodding their agreement, while others suddenly looked as if they would faint. The medical supplies in the room grew heavier, and the toll the pack was taking was suddenly more than apparent. Samuel took a deep breath, sending a sideways glance to the woman beside him. She nodded slightly, and he continued. To those of you who wish to participate, we are organizing a party to hunt them down. You can see Bray for details. Peyton stiffened, and his hands made tight fists at his side. He scowled at Samuel, a pleasant smile beginning to creep across his cold features. Samuel is right. If you wish to protect the pack, follow me. With his final words, Bray left the room. He disappeared behind the wall of windows, glass doors slamming shut behind him. Several people followed, but a few hesitantly walked up to Samuel. He caught one or two of them by the elbow, spoke lowly in their ears, and sent them after Bray. These select few ran after the group that Bray was now going to lead, the entire time glancing back at Samuel. Eventually, the room settled back into the motions from before. Though the movements were not as frenzied now, people still scurried from one room to the next, carrying medical supplies, crying companions, and death-like stares. My gaze was fixed on them for a long moment until it was torn away by the woman at Samuel's side. Really, Samuel? She walked in front of the two of us. Was that the best way to make that announcement? Samuel shrugged. Good a time as any. She rolled her eyes and rested her hands on her hips. Her hard gaze lingered on Samuel for a moment, before flickering to me. Samuel noticed her shift and sighed. This is Samantha, as I'm sure you know. He pushed me forward a bit more. I staggered on my foot, but as soon as it happened, I was pressed into Samuel's again. The woman's gaze dropped to my side, then to my feet. As quickly as it happened, her eyes traveled back up my body and met mine. She seemed to study me, as I did her, Her golden eyes burned into me, and I was reminded of an others that looked almost identical. Samuel's voice startled me out of my gaze. "Samantha, this is Goldie." She smiled, and her large lips thinned slightly. They accentuated her wide, set nose, and despite her overpowering features, she was the epitome of beauty. "It's nice to finally meet you, Samantha." Goldie took her hand in mine, shaking it briefly. I gave her a small smile, and she continued, "But you can call me Carmela. Some of the boys around here think it's funny to come up with ironic nicknames." Goldie sent Samuel a brief glare. Samuel looked at me and shook his head, dismissing her comment and request. He laughed once. "Don't blame me. It wasn't my doing." She rolled her eyes. "Of course it wasn't your doing. You're perfect, Samuel." He shrugged and shifted his weight, pulling me closer. Goldie eyed the two of us for a moment before pulling her hair up into a ponytail. Samuel took a second to look around the room, only to find the same scene as before. The earlier encounter with Bray had seemingly been forgotten, and the pack was running about its business. "Who did you send with him?" Goldie suddenly spoke, bringing both our gazes back to her. "Briggs and Arthur. Both said they did keep an eye on him." She nodded. "Good choices. I've got Raven guarding a room and she needs help or a replacement," Samuel began, all trace of humor gone from his voice. "Sooner rather than later." "The shift true?" Goldie questioned. Samuel nodded quickly, and her gaze darkened. "They'll send Nina over there when we're done. She'll help her." "How many?" Samuel questioned. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilbay. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilbay. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." "So far. And tomorrow?" Goldie shrugged. "Maybe 12. 11. If we're lucky." Without waiting for his response, Goldie continued. "Have you thought about this? About what's going to happen?" Samuel stiffened. "Have you already spoken with Marshall?" She scoffed. "Load of good that did." "Did he roll over when you snapped at him?" Samuel was quiet, and Goldie shook her head. "Cheers, right. And you know it. Come tomorrow." "I know." He cut her off. "We'll work it out. We'll fix it. There's nothing that needs fixing." Samuel was quiet. Once more, his shoulders sagged for the smallest moment before he picked himself up again. Goldie watched his reaction, and I knew she didn't miss his brief movement. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilbay. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." She caught my eye and nodded to herself, then spoke again. "Do you want me to take Samantha?" "If you are asking for you and Riley." He caught my eye, subconsciously tightening his grip on my waist. "No, I will take her. Give me a few minutes and I'll be back. I'll need someone outside her door." "As well." Goldie nodded. "Me and I can handle both, especially with Raven to help." She turned away from us then and began to cross the room, following a mass of people. "I'll be in the front." She didn't wait for Samuel's response before fully immersing herself in the crowd, getting lost in hurried feet and frantic bodies. Samuel sighed, but I spoke before he could. "What was that about?" He shifted my weight onto him again and turned down a hallway. I recognized it as the one we'd entered the house in earlier, the one that led to Will's room and a few others. "A few things. You don't need to worry. It'll be sorted out in the morning." She was talking about the same thing Marshall was, gripping onto his hand around my waist. It steadied me some, erasing the pain creeping into my side. "She's his daughter," he said without missing a beat, "and the beta female. She knows a few things." My step faltered. Beta female. By this time, we were rounding the corner and closing in upon the hallway of doors. I knew my questions were going to be limited, so I tried desperately to narrow them down to what I knew Samuel would answer, or I could drag out of him. Basically just the female version of my job. She helps me. I help her. We help the alpha. I had countless more questions about that, but they each got pushed aside for what was immediately weighing on my mind. What were they talking about? Her and Marshall. Samuel sighed heavily. I told you we'd talk about it later. I resisted the urge to scoff. Right. We rounded a final corner and reached a door. There wasn't anything special about it, as it was uniform with the rest of the hallway. Why did you send Bray off on his own? I asked as Samuel reached for the doorknob. He pushed the door open, pausing at my question. Why woodland high? The door swung open and a small room was revealed. Much like the rest of the house, the walls were lined with thick wood and the floor was covered with a fleece carpet. This one had frayed tassels on the ends, a myriad of faded colors lining its design. A small bed lay against the back wall with a window just above its frame. Next to it stood a matching nightstand that held only a broken lamp. Samuel led me into the room, but before we could go any further, I sunk my good heel into the ground and stopped our advance. He turned and eyed me warily, at which I only glared. Why did you send Bray off on his own? He held my gaze for a moment, before dropping his eyes and scanning the room. Eventually, he brought the dark blue orbs back to me and furrowed his eyebrows. Odd, Ichias not alone. We sent people with him. But, even then, you have to watch what you're implying. Samantha, why? Samuel looked out the doorway for a moment. Becky's pack is family, and family trusts each other. The words fell off my tongue, and silence was left in their wake. Samuel took this opportunity to pull me the rest of the way into the small room. I'm sorry it's not the biggest, he began, gesturing to the room. I just figured you'd want to be closer to her rather than have a large bed. You were right, I told him softly. Samuel walked up to the bed and placed me lightly on its surface. I immediately sunk into the blankets. An abrupt exhaustion threatened to overcome me. I pushed it back for a bit longer though, focusing on Samuel standing above me. What are you going to do? He looked around the room again, avoiding my gaze. Talk with Goldie. See the pack. Count the dead. Prepare the funerals. Figure it out tomorrow. My gaze dropped. I'm sorry you have to go through this. His hand suddenly found my chin, tilting it so that he could see my face. I gave Samuel a sad smile, which he returned. It's not your fault. Things happen. I nodded, and before I could ask another question, Samuel continued. I have to go. They'll come for you in the morning. He dropped my chin and took my hand instead. Our fingers intertwined and he traced my knuckles. Please. He paused for emphasis. Please don't try and leave or do anything stupid. There's someone guarding your room. But if you leave, I can't guarantee you'll be safe. Not tonight. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I watched his thumb run along the cracked skin of my knuckles. Chapter 48. It was in the tree line. Samuel left quickly and without looking back. I remained in my position on the bed, sinking further into the comforter by the second. It wasn't only the bed that wanted to swallow me. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. The entire room spoke of comfort and quaintness, drawing me into its soft and warm embrace. Sighing, I leaned against the wall behind me, my head brushed against the side of the window, and obstinately, my eyes wandered to the outside world. Exhaustion was quickly taking its toll on my body, but my mind held back. Almost immediately after Samuel leaving, my thoughts turned to Will. Among all my other questions and demands for answers, he'd forgotten to ask about my brother. I knew he was only a few doors down, but that gave me little comfort. I looked away from the fog glass to the bedroom door. The wood stood mockingly sturdy and proud. There was no way for me to break through the door, no way to see through even a crack into the hallway. I knew, of course, that I was locked in, simply that someone was supposed to be standing outside the door preventing anyone from entering. Still, I felt trapped. At the last thought, I found myself scowling. At the door, then at my ankle. If I was constantly injured, Making any sort of attempt at escape or seeing my brother would be a lot easier. That door wouldn't be as intimidating, and I wouldn't feel as imprisoned. My glare deepened, and I shifted my weight forward, gingerly placing my foot on the ground. I put the smallest amount of pressure on it and immediately drew back from the sharp pain shooting up my ankle. As soon as I did, there was a sudden creak outside the door. I whipped my gaze back up to the wood just in time to see the door slowly opening. A small hint of fear suddenly laced my limbs as I watched a figure come into view. The realization that I was full of angry werewolves was quickly falling upon me, along with the recognition that if one wanted to barge into my room and hurt me, I was completely defenseless. Soon, I felt my body tense with anticipation as my heart began to climb. Abruptly, though, the fear was cut short. The figure came into view and I let out a loud breath of relief. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. What are you doing here? My hand made its way to my chest, clutching my racing heart. Sorry, she shrugged sheepishly. I didn't mean to scare you. I was supposed to bring you this. She held up a small blue bundle by a white cap. A rag was wrapped underneath it, catching stray bits of water running off the sides of the shiny material. It's an ice pack, she continued, as she shut the door behind her and made her way over to the bed. Marshall said to put it on your ankle. You spoke to him? I asked as I took the pack from her, lifting my foot onto the bed. Raven hesitated for a moment before nodding and sitting on the edge of the mattress next to me. Just in passing, he didn't say anything other than to get you an ice pack. I placed the pack on my ankle, wincing slightly at the contact, when the coolness of the rag crept onto my skin. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Thank you. Hopefully, this will fix it. She smiled lightly. Just doing my job. Let me know if you need anything else. Raven stood and began walking back toward the door. Wait. Just as she put her hand on the doorknob. How is he? To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. She turned back to face me. I'm not sure, to be honest. We haven't heard anything from the room since we brought him in there. At this point in the shift, he should be resting. Is it over? Hope rising in my chest. Raven grimaced. No, not even close. My heart dropped. Is he going to lose control again? Not exactly. She trailed off. The physical shifting should be over. I don't know. It's different for everybody. It could come back. And if it doesn't, well, that's when the mental shift begins. Resisting the urge to massage my temples. Mental shift. Raven nodded, looking uncomfortable. It's what the humans have to go through. On top of everything else, they didn't grow up with a wolf inside of them, so their brain has to make room for one, or something like that. Okay. I trailed off, searching her features for elaboration. What does that even mean? I don't really know. All I know is the basics. I'd never actually seen a human go through it before. I nodded again, biting my lip as my next question surfaced. You don't think I could see him, do you? If Raven was uncomfortable before, she was entirely out of her element now. Samuel said not to let anyone in his room. I can't disobey him. Her voice heightened slightly. I sighed heavily, sinking back into the mattress. Relax. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I'm not going to try and get you to break me out of here again. She smiled then, sagging her shoulders as if a huge weight had suddenly been lifted from them. Thank you. Don't thank me just yet. I left. Not until I can see my brother. Right. Raven rolled her eyes. Let's just make it through the rest of tonight. Deal. Get some rest, while you can. It'll be outside, so if you need anything, just holler. Thanks. To our agent extraordinaire, Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. She returned the gesture, then slipped through the bedroom door. Once again, I was left alone. The room was filled with silence and still beckoned me to sleep. Groaning, I leaned back against the wall and resumed my prior position. The ice pack slipped slightly around my ankle, but I adjusted it and gazed out the window, letting the night lull my thoughts to sleep. It didn't work. No matter how long I sat in that position, no matter how hard I tried, my mind wouldn't shut down. I sat staring out the window, fogged with my breath. For what seemed like an eternity, the night was unnerving, attempting to aid the process of sleep. However, my mind wouldn't shut down. Questions, scenarios, thoughts, worries. To my agent extraordinaire, Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. And panicked attacks stumbled over one another, again and again, forcing out any thought of relaxation. Soon enough, the ice pack had melted, and my back was sore from leaning against wood. I groaned again, forcing my eyes shut only to have them ripped open by another panicked thought. This process continued for several minutes until it was cut short. Just as I opened my eyes to face that panic though, my gaze landed on something outside the window. It'd been staring into the night for hours, and it had remained unchanged. There was no sway of trees, no disturbance in the silence. Now, however, something was off. I couldn't find exactly where it was that something had changed, at least not at first. After a few moments of scanning the night, to my agent extraordinaire, Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. It was in the tree line, the one that Raven, Samuel, and I had driven through just hours before. The cars were still parked off to the side of the trees, doors hanging open as we'd left them. The trees had stayed the same as well, tall, green, and packed so closely together you could hardly see into the depth of the forest. That is, you could hardly see until something wanted you to. And suddenly, staring at the empty spot between the trees, I felt as if I was meant to see what was there. Yellow eyes, 2 of them, poking out just behind a gap in the tree line. They were trained on the house, the very window I was staring out of. The eyes never blinked, never moved, and never changed. For a moment, I thought I was imagining them. Then, an all too familiar feeling of panic rose from deep within my chest, and I bolted upright with a stark realization. I recognized those eyes. I'd seen them countless times before. Each time burned permanently into my memory. As if on cue with my realization, the eyes suddenly moved. They shrank for a moment, before bobbing up and down, growing larger and larger. The night hid the creature the eyes belonged to, but I didn't need it to know what it was. Even before the wolf came into view, I ripped my attention away from the window, already falling out of my bed and dashing to the bedroom door. Pins and needles crept up my back as I felt those eyes follow my movements. However, I didn't stop. I clawed desperately to the door, pulling myself up with the handle and ripping the doorway open. The minute I opened the door, I was met with a disgruntled groan. My eyes landed on the man who made the sound and quickly scanned the hallway for anyone else who could help. However, Raven was nowhere in sight, and I was left with the perturbed man. "What are you doing?" he demanded, coming into my direct line of vision. I leaned heavily against the doorway, taking my weight off my now throbbing foot. He stood tall, however, advancing ever so slightly upon my hunched frame. The man stopped in front of me, and I forced myself to stay where I was. Despite his height, the man was lanky and all bone. He was trying to covertly force me back into my room, but with the help of the doorframe, I was able to stand my ground. If anything, this annoyed him even more. "What are you doing?" he demanded again, looking me up and down. "You're not supposed to be out here." My breathing was heavy, and I suddenly found it difficult to speak. Where's Raven?" The man scoffed. "The Omega. I sent her to get me a snack. A snack. A snack. I was getting a little hungry babysitting all night and figured I deserved a reward. She was doing nothing, so I sent her along. My disbelief must have shown on my face, because the man scowled and continued speaking, making himself taller as he did so. But, like I was saying, you shouldn't be out here. Your place is in the room and not out here with everyone else. His tone turned venomous and I suddenly felt as if he were pushing me back with his words. I raised my eyebrows. The man folded his arms, cocking his head. Do I need to repeat myself? I didn't think humans' hearing was that bad. Guess I was wrong. My mouth fell open. I'm sorry. Did I miss something? Apparently. He ground his teeth. My temper flared. I opened my mouth to let the insults fly, but I suddenly felt pins and needles up my back one more. I chanced to glance behind me and back into the room, only to find the yellow eyes directly outside the window, bearing down on my back. Ignoring the man, I pushed myself forward, falling into his chest. He flinched at the contact and backed away immediately, raising his arms in disgust. What do you think you're doing? The man shouted as I hopped forward, slamming the bedroom door shut behind me. My heartbeat was loud in my ears, drowning out the previous conversation. There's someone out there. I began. The man cut me off. Well, to my agent extraordinaire, webnovel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. There's someone out there. Peyton and his guys are searching for the murderers. His tone darkened once more, and he was suddenly glaring at me. Maybe they caught a scent. I resisted the urge to scream. It was them. It was. I was suddenly cut off by a familiar figure making her way around the corner. When she saw me, hunched over and panting for breath, she nearly dropped the plate of food she had been holding. As soon as I caught her eye, Raven gathered her composure and rushed forward. In one, she handed the man the plate and placed her shoulder under my own, supporting my weight. What's going on? She asked me, slowly. I told you the white ones. The man suddenly cried, shoving the plate into Raven and my faces. They were out. Raven replied so softly, I almost didn't recognize her voice. The man grumbled and dropped the plate hastily into a chair across the hall. Get her back in her room. Raven nodded, but before she could move, I was pinching her arm against me in protest. Wait. And as soon as I did, her movement stopped. She tilted her head towards me, so I continued in rushed words. Yes, out there. Right outside my window. What are you talking about? She shifted toward the bedroom. I desperately tried sinking my good foot into the ground to hold her movements. However, before I could speak again, the man was interrupting us. This is ridiculous. Get back in the room. Stop making a scene. Before I could stop him, the man pushed past Raven and ironed into my bedroom. As soon as the door opened, I flinched back involuntarily, but the moment I did, silence filled the hall. My heart stopped beating, and no one moved. There was nothing there. Samantha. Raven started. Like I said, the man interrupted again, turning back around to face me. He glared, and the expression sent ice down my spine. Making a scene. Haven't you done enough damage tonight? I bowed my head in defeat and confusion. He was there. I swear he was. The man snorted. Right. And Alpha Riley's alive. This AI ain't a fantasy land. Get in the room and don't come out again. Hear me? Raven silently stepped forward. And this time, I didn't protest. The man walked behind us and back out into the hallway. He reached for his plate. And as soon as he did, an idea struck me. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I began in a small voice. I feel lightheaded. Can I get some water? Her step faltered, but she quickly sat me on the bed and began to retreat. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. The man in the hallway rolled his eyes. Bring her a sedative while you're at it. Omega. Raven nodded, bowing her head and moving out of sight. The door was left open for her short return, but the man was no longer paying attention to me. His gaze had shifted to the plate of food he was picking through, placing pieces of various meats and bread into his mouth. Ever so slightly, my head turned to look out the window. Sure enough, with the door completely open, the yellow eyes hadn't returned. I shifted my weight on the bed to get a better look out the window, searching for any evidence of their appearance. However, there was none. The night was as still as ever, the trees undisturbed, and the car door safely shut on the trucks outside the house.